Welcome to Rock and Roll Book Club, where we discuss books by and about musicians and the music business. I'm Dave, and on this episode, my co-hosts Shelley, Jennifer, and I are discussing I Am Brian Wilson by Brian Wilson and Ben Greenman. Brian is best known for his band, the Beach Boys. Beginning in 1961, the Beach Boys became one of the most successful and influential American rock bands of all time. They have sold over 100 million records and had 37 top 40 hits, the most of any American band ever. Brian was the band's primary songwriter and its producer. His mastery of studio production has become nearly as influential as the music of the Beach Boys. After experiencing some type of nervous breakdown while on tour with the band in 1964, Brian stopped being a touring member of the Beach Boys. He focused all his energies on writing and producing the music for the band. Brian's troubles continued throughout the 1960s and 70s. There were some residual effects from his abuse as a child, but Wilson was also diagnosed as having both schizophrenia and bipolar depression. He frequently heard voices and had difficulty distinguishing fantasy from reality. Much of the 1970s found Brian on drugs and staying in bed for months at a time. In an attempt to help Brian and get him back in the band, psychiatrist Dr. Eugene Landy began treating him with a new, more intensive type of therapy. In addition to controlling what Brian ate, what he did all day, and who he could be friends with or date, Dr. Landy also worked his way into Brian's business and his music. Fortunately, Brian's second wife, Melinda, saw through the doctor's manipulation and freed Brian from this dangerous influence. This book is a wild ride and is told in a manner that is 100% Brian Wilson. This was a fun episode, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit that notification bell. Thanks, as always, for watching Rock and Roll Book Club.
Welcome to Rock and Roll Book Club. I'm Shelley, and I'm here with my co-hosts Dave and Jen. And today we are covering Brian Wilson's book, I Am Brian Wilson, by Brian Wilson. And another guy that helped him.
I'm not flashing everyone. I'm just showing my support for the Beach Boys with my shirt. Yeah. Okay, cool.
I think we're going to be able to guess how you feel about the Beach Boys.
Oh, you think? I love them. They're amazing. They're the best.
Love it. Well, yeah, this is going to be a really interesting conversation today. The book is, in my opinion, a wild ride for a number of reasons. But before we get into it, Dave, do you want to give us a history lesson on the Beach Boys?
Sure thing. Brian Wilson is the legendary leader of the Beach Boys. He founded the band in 1961 with his two brothers and a cousin and a family friend. And over the course of time, because technically they are still together. I mean, there's like two guys left or whatever that are still performing as the Beach Boys, but they are still performing. They've sold over 100 million albums. They had 37 top 40 singles in their career. That's the most for any American band. Wow. They've been nominated for 9 Grammys, 2 wins. They have hits that almost every person knows. Surf City, I Get Around, Help Me Rhonda, Good Vibrations, Caroline No, California Girls, God Only Knows, Don't Worry Baby, dozens more. Okay. These are part of the identity of the 1960s American music. And Brian Wilson is also known not just for being the writer and creator of these songs, but he's also known for being an innovative producer. And that's almost what his legacy is best known as at this point, because he's the first person to sort of use the studio as an instrument. And most of the time in records prior to 1963, 64, when the Beach Boys were starting to make all their hits, most bands just walked into the studio and tracked everything live and just went for it. And you hope you got it right in 2 or 3 takes. Then you would come back and overdub the vocals, and then you're done. And Brian Wilson came up with a different way. He didn't want to just capture the track. His idea was there is a studio song, a creation independent of itself. Then there is performing the song live in front of an audience. And he separated the two because a lot of those Beach Boys songs could not be performed live as they are on the record. It's just, you'd have to have 10 or 15 people there, not just the 4 or 5 of the Beach Boys. So that's a big part of his legacy is innovation in production. The band's I don't know, best known or seminal album is Pet Sounds in 1966. Critical acclaim, massive success. But then the follow up to that in 1967 was an album called Smile that didn't get released until decades later. But it began sort of his breakdown and a bit of a diminished role for the Beach Boys. For the next couple of decades, he'd be in and out, and then he'd be in again, and then he'd be out again. And so that is considered the sort of the point where he sort of might have cracked a little bit. But as we'll discuss in the book, he had a lot of other issues besides just not being able to finish this one record, which he wanted to be his masterpiece.
Of course, I want to start.
I knew you would.
Thank you. I grew up with the Beach Boys. I've been listening to them since probably when I was like in the womb, but they're so incredible, and all of them in their own right, what they did together, and Brian Wilson, who is the most misunderstood person in music. And I've always known that, but I love them. I love what they do. I just love their preservation, just to get it done. Is that preservation the word? That's not the word I'm looking for.
Perseverance.
Perseverance. Thank you. It's Friday. Yeah. So I've always been a huge fan of Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. Do I like all their music? But I like them. So
Okay, that's fair.
That's
All right.
that's what I have to
Fair
say.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
All right,
me?
Dave.
Want me to go? Okay. My impressions are that as a student of rock and roll, I obviously am familiar with Brian Wilson. I've seen documentaries on him. I know a lot of history. I recognize them as an important historical band in the pantheon of rock music, which is an American art form starting in the 1950s, largely American. But I have to be honest, I just don't really like the music very much. Outside of a couple of songs, God Only Knows, and a handful of others, like it just doesn't connect with me at all. I don't relate to the culture of Southern California and the beach and all of that stuff. And like that is their most popular era, and an era that they were wanting to, the record company always wanted them to return back to. Mike Love wanted them to return back to all of these other things. So no matter what they might have tried to expand their sound, ultimately they did go back to what made them legends. So that's my feeling on it. I didn't really have a lot of personal reflections. I was disappointed though that in the book there was unless I missed it, there was no reference to putting sand in his house so he could have his feet in the sand while he was playing piano. And I know that actually happened because I've seen it on video.
It happened.
I was unhappy that it wasn't in the book.
It is featured in the movie Love and Mercy, which thank you for the recommendation, Jen.
Okay, good.
It does show it in there. So
wasn't it fantastic?
Oh my God, it was so good.
It's so good. Dave, watch it. Love and Mercy. With
It's
John
really
Cusack,
good. And
Paul Dano, Elizabeth Banks.
It was on a list eventually of some, so I'll eventually get to it. But I just, I haven't
so good.
yet.
I knew you'd love it. I meant to text you. Sorry.
So the cast is, Paul Dano is young Brian Wilson, and I love him as an actor.
Oh yeah,
He's incredible.
absolutely. Absolutely.
John Cusack is the older Brian Wilson. Paul Giamatti is Dr. Landy. Brilliant. And Elizabeth Banks is Melinda. And
it's
I
fantastic.
Awesome.
I like Elizabeth Banks.
So my impressions before reading the book, I think hearing what you guys, your perspectives, I think that we have a Goldilocks and the Three Bears situation here where Jen, you have the hot porridge, and Dave, you have the cold porridge. And I don't want to call mine just right, but I'm in the middle.
You're in the middle of porridge.
So,
lukewarm.
That's probably the best way of putting it. I'm lukewarm.
You're not cold, but you're not hot.
Yeah, exactly. I remember as a kid really liking their music. I remember my best friend growing up, Heather, shout out to Heather Jones.
Hey, Heather.
She lived 2 doors down from me, and her dad had this car that had this is like the 80s, and I think the car was from the 70s. So, the hood was like 8 miles long. And I remember sitting on it and us singing we'll have fun till daddy took the T-word away. And
Aw.
yeah. And so like, that's a fun childhood memory. But as an adult, I didn't listen to them much. You know, it would have just been radio exposure. I've heard lots of music fans that love it. I've talked about Pet Sounds being, you know, one of the best albums ever created, but I never really like took a listen and to even figure out why they were saying that. But I do have to say that in leading up to this book, I put it on, and I don't know why, but I had this impression of it that it was this like really complex and like hard to, you know, difficult to listen to and understand, like, you know, thing. And it's not like, it's a really easy listen to me, but that's also, you know, like 80 years ish after. I think, oh my God, not 80.
No,
60.
it wouldn't be 80 in the 60s. So
I'm like, wait, no, he died at
60
82.
some years afterwards.
60
Yeah.
years. Hi, words, not numbers. But like 60 years later is a much different story. So yeah, that's where I land.
Shout out to one thing that I don't want to forget. Brian Wilson actually mentioned Frank Black from the Pixies in the book, and shouted out that he did the song with the original lyrics, which I've always thought was very cool. And I was impressed that Brian Wilson even heard of the Pixies in the first place, like that he even knew it happened, and that he knew that that Frank Black used the original lyrics, not I Know There's an Answer. He did Hang On to Your Ego, which was the first round of lyrics on that particular tune. So happy to see that he got a mention in there.
Yeah, me too. Although I thought it was funny that Brian Wilson was like, I mean, I don't really listen to that band.
Yeah.
But I think it's cool that he did it.
But that's all you can really expect. I mean, he was, when the Pixies were going, he was already a guy in his 50s, maybe even his 60s. So he probably wasn't going to like it anyways. But just the fact that he acknowledged it and stuff, you know, I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I perked up at that reference also.
I would say that I think the legend of Murray Wilson is out there, right? He's considered this figure that, you know, is part of the Beach Boys story, and it has to be. But there's always been this mystery of that he was abusive and he was kind of a shitty person towards them, and especially towards Brian. And I know that in every telling of the Beach Boys story, that is always, you know, talked about, never specifically like what happened, just sort of a general, there was abuse in this household. He was a jerk. He was yelled and he hit people sometimes. But I felt like, for me, that situation wasn't really cleared up in the book. Like, I still wanted to know more about what actually happened, because the two brothers don't really speak of their dad that way. Brian does. And many times in the book, he says, this kind of reminds me of stuff about my dad, but I don't want to talk about that. And then he moves on. And he does eventually come around and talk a little bit about it, but he was always hedging, because he always wanted to say, but he loved us and he did this and he did that. And he was always hedging. And it still sounded like either he was under this thing of abuse and he still can't like break free of it, no matter that his dad died in 1973. Or, I mean, I don't know, this sounds bad, but, or it wasn't nearly as bad as we've all thought, because this is just shitty parenting from the 40s and 50s. And a lot of our parents had to deal with that crap too. Getting hit or whatever that wasn't considered out of bounds for the 1950s. I don't support any of that shit, obviously, but I do have to say, sometimes you do have to put it in the context of the time. Parents believed in corporal punishment a lot more back then. My parents did in the 70s. I mean, it would barely ever happen, but like, it, you know, and in Omaha public schools, I got hit in school in 9th grade. Like, it's still going on into the 80s. So I wanted to know more about that relationship. Like, I think it was so interesting that he was a songwriter and a musician, and he wrote songs, and he had one played on the Lawrence Welk show, and he had these ideas. And so part of it was he was living vicariously through his sons. He wanted, with their success, that for him, because he missed out on it. He didn't get it. And part of it, I think, was that. But
here's the thing. And I'm going to say this. Most likely, I mean, his father is a total narcissist. And I think Brian wasn't equipped to handle the abuse that his father, whereas Dennis and Carl, they didn't seem to get it as much because they probably didn't react. And I think Brian was just so tenderhearted, and he was also schizophrenic, FYI, and his father's a narcissist, and the father was jealous of their career the entire time. He talks about it. But remember when he said something about, there was a letter that his dad wrote him, and it was pretty vicious. And it was like, you're not giving me credit for who you are. It was something along those lines. And I think at the end of the day, it just was a cyclical, terrible situation that everyone was stuck in. And at the end of the day, Brian said, I'm not going to talk much about him. He's not here to tell his side. So I think as far as a mystery of what it really was, I think that's it, Dave. I think everything that was in the book, I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there, nor was I born. But I really, really think he was really hard on Brian. And let's go back to, let's add this in. Brian was the most talented.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. But I'm wondering, did the abuse start before he recognized that talent? Because I believe in the narcissist thing, and he was jealous of Brian's talent and jealous of Brian's abilities, and he wanted to act like he was in charge still. But I don't remember if he just didn't talk about it or I forgot or whatever. But did that abuse of Brian, or Brian feeling like he was getting abused from his dad, like, did that start before the music?
Oh, of course it did.
It did?
Yeah.
Okay.
It did. Well, if we take the movie Love and Mercy on face value, there's a scene in the movie where, let me back up. Brian talks about in the book how he had like almost total hearing loss in his right ear, which just also is phenomenal that he could be such a brilliant musician and producer and
who else didn't have a right ear that functioned, that made it big in music? Paul Stanley.
Paul Stanley.
Oh yeah. How could I forget? It's our boyfriend, Jen.
Yeah, I know. I love him.
Oh, sweet dear. He was our first lamb.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Good trivia question, Dave. But so he talks about that, but from my recollection, he doesn't say how it happened. But in the movie, it shows his dad hitting him, and that his dad hitting him so hard in the head as a child that's why he lost his hearing.
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
He was violent. Even
about the Beach Boys, like a VH1 thing that showed that exact same scene of it was Murray hitting Brian that caused him to damage his ear. So that is lore that's out there. I guess what I was trying to say before was I was disappointed because I wanted it to be more than just lore. I mean, not that I want Brian to relive his abuse or whatever, but it just feels like he was the one who knows what actually happened. And I understand wanting to let his dad have a say or whatever. But I mean, these books and these other stories and these documentaries, they don't give the dad any say either. So they did escape their dad pretty quickly. They fired him in like 1965. That's the main.
Yeah. Yes. I really think at the end of the day, Brian was the easiest to pick on and got the brunt of everything, which is why Carl and Dennis don't really have much.
I think Dennis gave his dad some shit back. Like Dennis was the only one that did that. I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Bad dad. Bad dad.
Bad dad. I encountered the book was that it very much was just like, and Jen, you said this, it's kind of like being in his head where it's just meandering and thoughts come in and thoughts come out. It is absolutely not like, Kim Gordon's book where it's like, this chapter is named after this album and we hear the story about that time of her life.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
it wasn't like, let me tell you about my dad. Let me tell you about my success. Let me tell you about this fucking crazy ass doctor that ruined my life, which we'll get into. What did you guys think about the way that it was written?
I mean, I think for a student of the Beach Boys like Jen, she probably followed and knew all of the different points when he was moving around. But for someone like me who doesn't know all of these points, he's talking about being in a studio in 1978. And then the next sentence, he's on that flight to Houston, the infamous flight where he freaked out and whatever. And then he's like, and then I took a few years off because I got really into drugs and I gained a lot of weight. And then it was 1986 and Kokomo came out, but I wasn't on that track. And, but I really do like it though. And then, so it was just very hard to follow because there wasn't, I started picking up his style a little bit. Like, okay, he did jump from one thing to the other. In his mind, I started trying to figure out, does this make sense to him? Like, is there a reason why he jumps from 1975 to 1965 to 1999 to this or that? Because it was confusing to me. There were a lot of times where he did repeat himself sort of in certain instances about certain certain stories. He referenced that Houston thing a dozen times. It only happened once, but he went back to it repeatedly. So yeah, you're right. It was a little confusing and hard to follow. I think if you know the Beach Boys really well and know every one of their albums, it's going to seem a lot more coherent. But for someone who doesn't, it seemed very confusing to me.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I was okay because I'm familiar with him. Mm-hmm. Plus, I did see that film as well. But honestly, I think it's I think if you're going to read this, all of you out there, you might want to do a little background before. You might just want to Google him and just maybe go to like the Wikipedia page or something and just get a framework for what you're reading.
Well, it also depends on what you really want to learn about. Do you really want to learn about the Beach Boys, or do you want to learn about just the life of Brian Wilson? Someone should read, I don't know what the best biography on the Beach Boys is. I don't have a recommendation. I don't know. But if you really want to know the Beach Boys and follow their career from start to finish, I would recommend that. This is a lot of the personality of Brian Wilson, a lot of, the times where he was sort of lost for a few years, like when he came back in the late 70s and people were like, where you been, like whatever. And so I guess that's what I would say. It depends on what you are looking for.
I have to say, I agree with you, Dave, that that it would be good before reading the book to get some background. For me, my first impression of the book was, okay, this book assumes that you have like a basic knowledge of Brian Wilson and the history of the Beach Boys, and that this is kind of written for the fan that like really loves Brian Wilson already. And that's perfectly fine. It's not a criticism of the book. But when I watched Love and Mercy, thank you again, Jen, for that rec, a lot of the pieces came together for me. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, I get it. Yeah. I see.
Because that's like a normal story structure.
So a lot of the pieces came together for me in watching Love and Mercy. And to your point, Dave, I think Brian Wilson really downplayed a lot of, the really bad things that happened to him, the traumas in his life. And in the book,
it seems that way.
And I don't know, the reasoning for that, if it's that stuff that he just didn't want to talk about, if he's maybe suppressed some of those memories, if he feels protective of those people. But it was, you would think you would get, like, those would be the juicy parts of a book like this. And you really don't.
It's not a typical memoir, obviously.
I know. I think given all the drugs and everything that he's been through, and I think I'm going to say, as you said, he probably doesn't remember a ton, and the major trauma, he might have already processed. You know what I'm saying? Or like he found a way to deal with it, because he's almost childlike in this book.
I think it's more like what you're just saying right there. Like he's figured out some way, because he can remember vivid detail about a recording session 60 years ago or 50 years ago, whenever he wrote this book. But then he doesn't really remember details about his dad being an abusive dickhead or whatever. Like I think it's either blocked it out or he dealt with it in therapy and he doesn't want to deal with it anymore. Or, maybe he is worried that he just doesn't want to talk shit about his family because they're deceased.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I was thinking about was, okay, we have a co-author and we have an editor involved in the making of this book. Mm-hmm. And I always just like to think about the choices that writers make, and even the pressure that they might get from their publisher to revise it in a certain sort of way. And my first thought was like, where the hell was the editor on this? And then I quickly learned, that like, no, this is really capturing the mind of Brian Wilson,
Brian.
like you said, Jen.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was like, okay, like, I think it actually, instead of being a poor editorial choice, I think it was a really respectful editorial choice. And I also do think it's really interesting to put something out that is unlike any of the many things that have already been written about the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson. So I really liked that about the book, but it was hard to follow, and it really did not tell the whole picture. Of what was going on in his life.
And if you're walking into this with very, little or basic knowledge, it doesn't work. I mean, it works enough, but
I mean, you'll get it, but
players are.
No, I mean, I like the section where he talks about the beginning of the Beach Boys and their origins and their first recording session, and that stuff is very tight. It's very narrative normal or whatever, and it's factual and stuff like that. But yeah, eventually, after he tells the story of the breakdown or whatever on that flight to Houston, the narrative jumps everywhere after that. Like, it's never just going one way. It's always this way, that way, over here, over there. So that's clearly, that was a big thing too, like a significant thing. That was sort of the ending of the Beach Boys as a touring entity, just those guys. Then they started bringing in Glenn Campbell, Bruce Johnston, all these other dudes, eventually to what's his name? I almost said Scott Baio. John, whatever his fucking name is.
They brought in Chachi. They brought in the Fonz.
Uncle Jesse.
No, I meant Stamos, but I said Scott Baio. Okay, I didn't mean Scott, but I didn't mean to insult John Stamos like that, because that is not right. He is much cooler than Scott Baio.
For sure.
Well, these days, for sure. Yes. Yeah. They're both very handsome at their primes. And I mean, I think that
big stars.
John Stamos is still a pretty handsome dude. But
he's pretty famous. Scott Baio was probably working at Subway. It is interesting to hear people be realistic about their, like, when you talk about like the first time they ever heard their song on the radio and their genuine excitement about that and certain things. And it's just like, that part was really enjoyable and really interesting. I think their impact on music is fairly obvious. If you are a student of pop music or rock music and beyond your personal era, almost everybody does know the Beach Boys. When you're talking about the 1960s, you got the British Invasion, which is the Beatles, Stones, Kinks, The Who. And then you've got, on the American side, there's the Beach Boys. There really aren't a lot of competitors for them in that 1962, 63, 64. Most of those were duos or solo acts. So in a sense, they get that space alone. When you're talking about, well, what were American bands doing? Well, it was the Beach Boys. Like, they were a counter to it. So I think that's why they still stand out, because they didn't have a lot of peers that were doing anything like what they were doing. There were other surf artists, and surf was a big trendy thing in the early 60s, but most of them didn't have any life after that. After that trend was over, they didn't have anywhere else to go. Yeah. And the Beach Boys did. I mean, they ran out of some space at the end of the 60s, but they definitely had more space beyond surf music. I mean, they had a better career. So that's why they stand out. Someone like Jan and Dean doesn't. Yeah. I think Brian Wilson had a certain awareness that, I don't want to keep doing the same thing. And he was at least, I consciously want to challenge myself to do something better. And that's the part that doesn't always come across. That's the mad genius or the whatever, the part that he was so focused on stuff. I mean, I've heard, this is his recollection. Okay. I've heard from the musicians that played on some of those sessions. It wasn't just 10 tries. No, it was more like 40 and 50. Like, he was relentless. Do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. Just like Phil Spector was like that too. He was a taskmaster and a perfectionist. I think that has a big impact on it too.
Absolutely. And they show that in the film as well with the Wrecking Crew. Okay. How cool is that? I am going to say, I think their genre of music early on, they created this California beach, campfire, cars, music, sun. They created such a lifestyle through their music. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's where we wanted to be. It's the summer. It's California. It's just, it's cool how they did that. And I think just like any other group, I mean, for example, the Beatles, I mean, they went from I Want to Hold Your Hand and Baby You Can Drive My Car to like Dear Prudence. So I think, with the Beach Boys, those really early on basic 101 songs, they were great. I mean, they kind of all sound the same a little bit, but once they were able to break away from that and go deeper, it's just the evolution of a band.
Well, but people like those early songs enough.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
The Beach Boys can still tour for decades after that.
Yeah.
Nobody buys, say they put out a new album in 1978.
No.
Nobody cares, but they're going to go to see the Beach Boys in concert. Right.
I mean,
so they were, I mean, and a lot of classic bands hit that point. Like the Rolling Stones, I'm wearing their shirt. Okay. They put out a record last year. I bet you that sold 100,000 copies. They used to sell 7 or 8 million in the old days, but they fill up every stadium they play in because people still love those original songs. They get a beer when the new song comes on. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Like, you know what? I thought another thing that the movie brought to light more than the book did was, speaking about how they kind of like branded themselves early on and created this vibe that they represented. And then as Brian kept growing as a musician, and did Pet Sounds, and then it kind of bombed at that time. It was his cousin Mike who said, like, we have to go back to the formula. We have to essentially continue to be the brand that we've built. And Brian's opinion was like, no, we have to keep evolving. And that there was a big conflict between the two of them over what was the right direction of the band. And I was thinking to myself, I don't know what I would do in that situation if I were their manager, because it's like what they're doing works great. But then also, what are the possibilities, and could this be even bigger or a more significant contribution to music? Mm-hmm. So I just thought that was interesting, like this big fight, but that like it didn't feel like either person was wrong.
Yeah. No, and they actually, if you remember in the book, at some point, I think in the 70s, they sort of swapped opinions. Mike Love wanted to try something different and not do the same stuff, and Brian was ready to write some beach songs or whatever. Like he was okay with doing it. He'd cleared a mental blockage or whatever. And he's like, yeah, I'm fine. Let's do some traditional songs. So it did go back and forth. I do think that was a central conflict, and it would be rough as a manager or as somebody with them because of the fact that you do have this genius with Brian Wilson, who's created this great stuff. But on the other hand, he doesn't deliver on deadline. He was late delivering records. He doesn't perform with the band except rarely. They're the ones that have to go out and present these songs to an audience. So on the other hand, if Mike Love is saying, look, like I can't sing these crazy songs with the orchestra and all of this, like you need to give me something I can sing, like I get around or whatever. Like I need something that rocks the crowd. So I understand them both sides of it. Like he's the one who has to go out there and play it. Mm-hmm. But Brian is the one who has to create it from nothing. And there is that central conflict. And I don't think that's unique to them, but I mean, it certainly is part of it. The fact that he stopped performing with them. And so what are they going to do? Keep playing the same songs from 1962 to like 66? Are they going to try to play songs off the new music that he's doing that they don't fully understand and they don't completely embrace it? Because Mike Love wasn't on board with Pet Sounds either. So, I mean, he apparently didn't like it. So, it's tough. I mean, it is a difficult situation. That's the artist versus, business. Because if you don't do any business, then how are you going to afford to be in the studio 24 hours a day? You know what I mean? There's a difference. It's hard. And that has to be worked through at some point. No one is right. No one is completely wrong. It's just, you have to find a happy balance. And there was a period there where Brian wasn't interested in that. And then later on, he kind of realized, no, I do want that.
Yeah.
So that's why he would come back and forth, it seemed.
Mm-hmm. And, there's a lot of references to some great musicians throughout the book. Jen, do you want to talk about his relationship with music and how he listened to it and who he loved?
Okay, so there definitely is some tea in this book, right? And I mean, he doesn't like Paul Simon, or maybe he just doesn't like playing with Paul Simon. And his reason was, I opened for him and it's 4:00 and it's 500 degrees and you're outside and no one's listening to you because they're going to get beers. I get that. He didn't like that. Now, did he not like Paul Simon? I don't know.
If Paul had anything to do with that personally, but
no, not at all. Not at all. But that's the only negative thing that he really, I mean, his love for musicians, he was obsessed with Phil Spector.
The Four Freshmen.
Four Freshmen. Yeah. And that's incredible. Going to that concert with his dad. And I mean, he was giddy to meet these guys. And I just, his
What's
passion.
funny is there's a version of the Four Freshmen still today with guys that are in their 20s. Yeah, they're in their 20s. They cycled through dozens of guys. Yeah. He referenced it in the book. He met the Four Freshmen after the Beach Boys had started, and they weren't the same Four Freshmen from when he met them in the 50s.
Yeah.
The American Menudo.
Came from broad sources. I mean, Gershwin and the Four Freshmen and early R&B. I mean, he did have a good ear for stuff.
Yes.
And he had a wide range of influence. Oh. But when he pushed it all together and it came out, it was very different than what, than his influences. I guess that's what you want.
But I do agreed. And I want to mention Be My Baby.
Mm-hmm.
Like his favorite song in the world. And he said he listened to it every single day. I mean, that's passion. Is there a song you guys will listen to every single day?
I mean, I don't know about every single day. I'm not sure. I mean, I have heard songs that when I heard it, it was so good. I wanted to play it again and again and again. Yeah, I don't know about every single day for like whatever, but I have had songs where I wasn't even expecting it. Halfway through, I'm like, God damn, this is fucking good. What is this? And as soon as it ends, like, do it again, do it again, do it again. So it does happen occasionally. But I'm not quite as obsessive as Brian Wilson, I guess. I don't know.
It made him happy, I guess. I don't know. But I think his respect for other musicians, and I think Jan and Dean did one of his songs, and he was excited. Like, he's not really an angry man.
No,
I think he's just trying to get through the day, and I just love the fact that he didn't really seem to be all that bothered by other people's successes and his competition. I mean, Jan and Dean? He basically gave them a song. So
no, his only competitor was the Beatles in the '60s. I mean, beyond that, he was so far ahead of Jan and Dean and whatever other surf stuff, I mean, and like I said, there wasn't a lot of American competition in the early '60s in terms of bands. I mean, everybody was about the British invasion and the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
It was like one and then the Beach Boys. Like there wasn't a lot of until you hit like 66, 67, and then America comes roaring back. Jimi Hendrix, The Doors, etc., all that shit. But
you're absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah. Just like with most people who have problems with drugs, it starts recreationally, it starts fun, and it expands your mind, and it helps you create. And he talked about he smoked a joint, and he wrote a song, and all of these cool things. And his first time he took LSD, I think he wrote a really famous song. It's the problem is when you just start to do it over and over and over and over, and eventually you're a guy living in his bedroom, sleeping on his couch, not doing much. You're content with that. You lose the fire that was making you create. And so that definitely was an issue. But he also was mixing casual street drugs with pharmaceutical stuff being prescribed to him by a psychiatrist. In the 70s, he was. I mean, I know that Landy guy was like, tried to keep him off street drugs, but he managed to get it anyways. So he was still doing coke while doing the drugs that the Landy was giving him and doing all. So his was the worst of all worlds when you're getting all of that stuff pushed together. I mean, street drugs and psycho, whatever the term is. It's no wonder he didn't know what the hell day it was or whatever. Or, I mean, you're just getting drugged up, coming and going every, so it helped at first and then it hurt later on, just like with a lot of, drug addicts who start off, it enhances their creativity and then it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jen?
Yeah. What do you think?
I agree. I just think I think he was in so much pain. He would do anything possible to numb it. And actually, I don't know if it was pain. I mean, it was the voices, right? I mean, he said he refers to the voices throughout. It's like, I can't silence him. It's getting harder to silence him. He was schizophrenic and he's, taking all of his meds and then he's mixing it with coke, with booze, with God knows what else.
Smoking weed.
Yes. It's not like he had a job he had to go to, right? I mean,
right. He clearly had tons of money. He made a lot of money in the Beach Boys. Because when he
Absolutely.
divorced his first wife in their settlement, she got half his publishing.
Oh
You know
God.
how much money that's fucking worth?
Yeah.
God, she is a rich, well, I think she's deceased now, but she was a rich woman for a while. That first wife. Damn.
Yeah.
Half his publishing.
You know what I thought was really interesting was that how much he talked about regretting doing drugs and alcohol, but
Mhm.
not it seemed to me, and maybe this isn't accurate, but not as much about, I wasted parts of my life as much as after I did LSD for the first time, that's when the voices started. And I think it really seemed to me like he felt it was his fault that he
Yeah.
had the voices. Like that if he had never done LSD, that never would have been a part of his life. And he
Mhm.
says in the book, like, they told me that something else would have incited it, but
Yeah.
he seemed to still feel like that was his fault. And that really made me feel sad for him that, it really wasn't his fault.
Yeah.
And that he
No, and there
carried
would have
that
been a
burden.
triggering incident at another time. I mean, that's what I've heard
Yeah.
from every schizophrenic is like they can trace it back to one particular incident that happened, and that's when
Mhm.
so whether it would have been him taking LSD or whether it would have been 6 months later.
That's another thing in the book where you kind of don't totally understand what's going on. I don't know that does he talk about his diagnosis?
I don't know if they ever said the word schizophrenia, but he definitely
Yeah.
knew he had mental illness because he said, or he said something, and then he goes, or what they now call mental illness. And
Yeah.
he did talk about how you have to acknowledge that it's there, otherwise it'll never be treated. And the
Yeah.
part of the problem is nobody acknowledges it. So he was aware of it. I don't think he ever uttered the word schizophrenia or said a specific diagnosis. Jen, did he? I don't remember
Not
that.
really, but I mean, I think with the voices and his behaviors, and I mean, maybe
Mhm.
I just diagnosed it myself.
And also just extreme depression. I
Well,
mean, a person doesn't stay in their bed for a week at a time for schizophrenia alone. I
yeah.
mean, he definitely had other problems going on, like
Yeah.
severe
Yeah.
depression.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I read spent however many years in bed more as a symptom of his mental illness than his drug use, although I'm sure the drug use was part of it also.
Okay. So he was diagnosed with depression and schizophrenia. So there you go.
Okay.
Although I
Yeah.
could
I
swear at
mean,
the end of the movie, it said that Dr. Landy misdiagnosed him with schizophrenia, and that late in life he was properly diagnosed. But I could have read that wrong.
I
well,
mean, that
Dr.
could be
Landy
though, because I mean,
sucked.
there was a lot of people misdiagnosed with shit in the 60s
Yeah,
and 70s.
totally.
I mean,
Mental health.
Yeah. This brings us to one of the saddest and craziest parts of Brian Wilson's life, which is a man we call Dr. Landy.
yeah.
So for any of our audience who doesn't know, this was a guy that at first
Psychiatrist.
entered a psychiatrist, a doctor who entered Brian Wilson's life, and at first seemed like he was helping him get everything under control and properly medicating him, but it over many years spiraled out into basically Dr. Landy taking over his like entire life, like becoming
Mhm.
his manager and
His
telling him what he could and
guardian.
couldn't eat and who he could and couldn't see. And there's this like heartbreaking scene in the movie where Dr. Landy is just like screaming at him to sing and to get it right, and like Brian Wilson is just this crumpled, sad mess on the floor and just totally like zoned the fuck out on just shitloads of pills.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's really sad. And Dave, I kind of felt like you with the dad, where I was like, this is really one of the stories that I'm here for, because it's just so crazy.
Yeah.
And yet in the book, he never talks about how he met Dr. Landy. He doesn't
Well,
really say
I
there's
think
no
he
like
said that he was,
consistent narrative about him.
yeah, it was very vague. He didn't like to give a lot of specifics. He had two periods of time in his life with that Dr. Landy, because there was the initial time when it sort of seemed like he might be helping. But then the Beach Boys actually did bring him back at one point because after he fired Landy the first time, and then he was just like going to shows and fucking up at shows and barely being able to handle being on tour. He tried to go back out with the Beach Boys. And then I think they brought him back in, not thinking we were not trying to harm Brian, but it's just like, he seemed a little more under control with Landy. And now that Landy's gone, he's clearly out of control again. And then they had to intervene with court and all this to get him removed from him last time. I mean, almost like Britney Spears, he was under a sort of a conservatorship in a way because Al took over his finances and Al Jardine took over his vote in the Beach Boys business. Like they all had to vote on things for, business purposes. Al took over his vote because he was so far gone, and to keep it away from Landy because he was such a detrimental person.
Yeah. Horrible.
And I hate to keep moving it back to Paul Stanley, but Paul Stanley, who also had a bad right ear, also had a dependency on a psychiatrist who he eventually made kiss his manager. So it happens to a lot of people, and these are two very different types. I mean, Brian Wilson and Paul Stanley, they didn't even have very few similarities other than those two, but it is weird how you could get to that point where he was charging him something like $100,000 a month or something for treatment and making him buy him a house and all this other shit. And like he would go on vacations to Hawaii without Brian, and Brian was paying for it.
Yeah, he moved into Brian's house and moved Brian to this like small little place with a piano in it.
It's terrible. But I'm going to say this. No one was there to tell him no.
In the defense of, say, his wife and the Beach Boys guys at the beginning, they do know he had problems.
Yeah.
They wanted to help him. They thought this is the way you do it. He needs intensive therapy, not just once a week going to see, have a 1 hour appointment. Like he needs intensive. What he got, though, was I think a lot of people just said, all right, well, looks good. I'm out of here. And then just said he's going to recover and he'll be fine later. And then they didn't know the depths of how bad it got.
Yeah.
And Landry just figured out how to get his way in and probably painted a picture to Carl or Dennis or whoever was looking out for him because he wasn't married anymore. I think his kids were younger. I mean, it's sad. It was a total Paul Giamatti takeover because he plays him in the film.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
It's like heartbreaking. It was extremely unethical what he did. He made Brian Wilson dependent upon him, and he took advantage of him by taking part of his publishing and making him make albums with him. I mean, are you fucking kidding me? Your psychiatrist is like, let's make an album together. And that sounded like a good idea. No, you must have been on some serious psychoactive drugs to have been like, yeah, okay, let's do it. Let's go.
Well, and Landy was over-medicating him, and he was abusing him, mentally and physically. It was just a fucking mess.
Horrible.
If anybody ever offers you, like, I'm your personal doctor and I will be with you 24/7, guys, red flag. I'm just going to say no. Controversial opinion. Red flag.
Call one of us.
That's a good segue to the role of Brian's second wife, Melinda, and also his housekeeper, Gloria.
And Melinda passed away like 2 years ago, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she did pass away before him.
Recently.
Yeah. They're kind of heroes in this book. Like, Jen, tell us why.
Well, so he met Melinda when he was buying a car. What was he buying? It wasn't a
Cadillac.
Yeah, it was a Caddy. Yeah, he was buying a Caddy and they kind of clicked, and then he went away, and then he came back without Landry and got the car, and they just kind of hit it off. Beyond that control, he would reach out to her. They would connect. They would go, have bagels and talk. And I think she was so kind and available and concerned about him. That was the hook. That was the connect. I mean, she was lovely. So
it was a real connection as opposed to Landy knows, okay, you're a guy, you're going to need a woman every now and again. So he'd just drop off some chick and be like, here you go, buddy.
Yes,
and that wasn't what he was interested in. Like he wanted to meet somebody like he met with Melinda. So I could see that Landy was just a dirtbag all around. But, and I think his objection to Melinda was just, he doesn't want anyone who is not just some like bimbo that'll be with him for the night. She was genuinely interested in him, and he thought, she will eventually figure out what I'm doing.
Absolutely.
And raise the flags. And so that's why he didn't want her anywhere near
Absolutely.
She wasn't an idiot, she was going to be able to figure it out.
So they bumped into each other one day. I believe she almost hit him with the car when he was walking. That's kind of funny. I mean, it's funny in the way that's how they reconnected, and they reconnected, and she caught on. She was all over it.
Yeah.
And she reached out to Carl, because I believe Dennis was gone.
I think Carl, because he's the one who started taking control of stuff so that Landy couldn't do it.
And Gloria was his housekeeper. She just looked after everyone and looked after him. And between her and Melinda and Carl, they got him out.
Any comments on Brian as a father? I mean, he seemed to have some real regrets about his children with Marilyn. And then it seemed like he tried to right some wrongs with his children with Melinda.
But I also think I agree with you that he stated he wasn't a good father to his first two kids because he just wasn't mentally there. I mean, he wasn't trying to act like he was dad of the century or anything like that. I'd give him a solid C because, as we know, he's not entirely the most reliable narrator about certain times in his life, and sometimes certain things he just would rather not talk about. So it seems like his second wife with his next batch of kids, I think 3 of them, maybe.
I think 5.
5.
Like
okay,
20.
5 that he adopted.
Yeah.
It seems like he's a lot more involved. He wasn't on drugs. It wasn't whatever. But this is also just him telling us this. We don't really know. I don't see any reason not to believe him or anything. But based on the fact that he didn't do much, maybe he would overcompensate the second time and be great. But I basically say I'd give him a C.
I guess if we're going to grade him, I might do a C+ because because he admitted he was not good and he did the best he could with the second family.
He did seem like he tried.
Yeah, I'm gonna give him a C+ just for the admitting, and yeah.
I want to give Melinda a shout out that I missed out on when we were talking about her, and that is that she just seemed to bring so much peace and stability to his life.
Mm-hmm.
Like she gave him that foundation where he could actually be a present father.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just she just is such a saint. I loved her.
And I mean, I think for her, listen, she was selling Cadillacs in LA. I mean, that's hard. She probably was like, he's so kind, and they really connected,
Yeah. She didn't even know he was in the Beach Boys.
No, I
when
know.
They first met. Somebody else told her, and she's like, "Oh,
right." And she's like, "Okay, so he might be sleeping for a long time." But I feel like when he was with Melinda, he was his best.
I felt like the narrative structure almost reflected that in a way where, like Dave, you were talking about how, the beginnings of the Beach Boys were kind of clear, and that was pre-mental illness, and then things kind of spin out and we're getting thoughts all over. But I don't know if you guys agree, but I felt like toward the end, it got a lot clearer and more just like a straight narrative. And it's almost like, that reflects his state of mind at his different points in life.
Well, and it's so interesting because he is so aware of everything. He'll be like, I laid in bed for 8 months. I don't know why. I was just really tired. Like, I think he's aware of what he's doing. I think he's aware of how he feels with all these diseases. I don't know.
Yeah. I think he's aware of all that. I mean, I think it is sort of the childlike thing that he kind of comes back to every now and again is like, that's part of his personality. But I also think that's part of his way of being vague about talking about a lot of sort of hurtful subjects, maybe that he can just kind of gloss over them a little bit with his kind of manner, and everyone's like, "Oh, Brian, what a sweet guy." And and as a reader of the book and like wanting to know, like that leaves me frustrated sometimes. Like I want to know. I don't want to know, a soft reflection about it. I want to know what actually happened. And but I do agree that towards the end it got a little more together. Again, he was talking about getting the Pet Sounds concert together and the Smile concert that he did and the tour. And it did seem like he's following a pattern here. Like I get where he's at when he finally his last shows with the Beach Boys and that sort of thing. All that stuff was pretty, in order.
Yeah. Yeah.
Easy to follow. He wasn't jumping back to 1964 and flying on that plane to Houston.
Well, mine are number one, that Brian Wilson didn't like the beach. I mean, what in the actual fuck? Your name is the Beach Boys, and in your book you reveal that you didn't like the feeling of the sand on your feet until later, clearly. He was so pale that he wore jeans because he didn't want to get sunburnt. It was too hot. It just was like he hated it. And I was like, is this
bitching and
true?
bitching.
Well, then you remember he went into the period where they were writing songs about cars, and he didn't give a shit about cars either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, no interest.
Although
cars.
he did then rediscover the beach later in the book and was like, actually, maybe it's not so bad. You just have to kind of do it right.
Do you
I was
think he
like, okay.
regretted all those years with having a beach down the street? Like, it's not so bad here.
Yeah.
No,
Maybe I do like the sand in my feet. You know,
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe I was wrong all along.
All this time that the beach is awesome. The beach is fantastic.
Who knew?
I like the beach.
I think for me the most surprising part was really the way the Beach Boys worked throughout Brian Wilson's down period of like the 70s. Like they did kind of continue on. They did make records. Sometimes Brian was there, sometimes he wasn't. Sometimes he'd appear at a show, sometimes he wouldn't. It was just sort of, they dealt with him that way. That was the nature of the band. And it's sort of like, hey, Brian's here, or Brian's not here. And they would just soldier on. And it's unusual for a band because even you say, well, Brian's not here, but he's not even the lead singer. So it's not like you're going to notice, like for people who are just know the general of the Beach Boys.
Exactly.
Right. They might not even notice he's not there because they're just thinking they just like the songs. But he had to, it was always a big deal when he came back. So
David,
but,
I think probably over half, if not more of the crowd probably didn't even realize it.
No, probably not. And they didn't care. They were having a good time. They were there to drink beer in the sun and watch the Beach Boys. So they didn't. Yes. But I did think that was interesting because the way they carried on their business.
Yeah. And then my other most surprising part of the book was how much he talked about his weight. Mm-hmm. And, you know, like it becomes clear that his weight fluctuated throughout his life. And that was one of the things that Dr. Landy like really got on his ass about. But I just was really
specific numbers what he weighed. He goes, I was 270 at that point. And like that clearly was a thing for him because you don't remember your actual weight period, at periods unless you're really focused on it. That obviously was a big deal to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a huge and all of that depression and all the drugs and his, wanting to lay in bed. It was
embarrassing. He'd go out in public or something and they see this 300-pound, whoa, what happened to that guy from the Beach Boys? Whatever. I mean, and he had to deal with that. That's why he didn't go out that much.
Yeah, right.
He didn't have to deal with it.
Blame him for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I usually don't hear men speak about their weight in such a self-conscious way. And so I had a lot of empathy for him about that. If you will indulge me, I would really like to hand you my minute. Jen,
I'm taking a minute.
Are you taking
a minute?
I'm taking it.
I think you should. Let's take a minute.
I'm going to take a minute. As I've always said, Brian Wilson is so much more than Surf and Safari. He is a frustrated genius. We've talked about this. He's misunderstood. He is absolutely incredible. And I beg anyone to go a little bit deeper. And I mean, Pet Sounds it's incredible. I mean, are you going to put it on and listen to it straight through over and over? Not really. But I think, if you pick and choose what you want to hear, it's all incredible, but it's a matter of preference. So I think anyone who's interested, do a deep dive into him because he is absolutely incredible. The Wrecking Crew was a group of musicians in California, and they would come together and they would be the sound behind the song. And they worked in, like Glenn Campbell was a member of the Wrecking Crew, another brilliant musician. He did not write any of his songs, FYI, but we'll talk about that another time.
Mm.
And I think, you've got this sound that everybody wanted. Leon Russell, Glenn Campbell. I mean, like, I think Leon Russell was in it for a while, but not a ton. And I mean, basically, they were able, in my opinion, to formulate what Brian wanted. And that's where the magic happened, was with the Wrecking Crew. There's an excellent documentary on Netflix about him. I highly suggest everyone watches it. And I'm going to watch it again myself. But these are just incredible, brilliant musicians. And Dave was talking earlier that you've got the Beach Boys. They don't sound, God only knows all of that. That doesn't sound like it does when you hear it on the album, because it's none of the guys that are playing it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a part. These musicians are so incredibly dynamic.
The wolf is the person who is, maybe our villain in the book, who's predatory. The lamb is the sweet, lovable person. And the ultimate survivor is obviously who we feel like ended up strongest at the end.
Okay.
Dave, you want to go first?
Yeah, okay. I think ours are going to all be pretty similar, I would assume. I mean, the wolf for me was Landy, Dr. Landy. It could have been the dad for sure, but I went with Landy because I felt like the dad was an abusive dick, but that could have been residual from him growing up that way, and he just pushed that out. Okay, so maybe that's an excuse, sort of, not really. But so I would say Landy as the wolf. The lamb would be Brian, of course. I mean, I don't think you could put anyone else in there. The survivor, I wanted to go with, just say Beach Boys music or whatever, but I think I would say the survivor is the techniques in the studio and the production level stuff that Brian Wilson invented and left for other producers to use, because plenty did after that. The whole idea of big multi-track recordings. I mean, he did a lot of that at the beginning. So I would say the survivor is really his skill as a producer, even more so than anything else. Those would be my three.
Yeah. Bringing the theremin into Good Vibrations. I mean, just the level and the layers of music that are in these songs. It's okay. Sorry, I'll go. I'm very passionate about Brian Wilson.
I love it.
Okay. So the wolf for sure is Landy. That son of a bitch. The lamb, honestly, I think the lambs are Marilyn and Melinda, both of his wives. And I mean, and I'm saying with the exception of Melissa, what was her name? Marilyn and the 7 million, whatever. And then I will say the survivor is Brian, and also his mother for having to deal with that jackass, of the husband. And she wasn't happy. I mean, they said that towards the end that they were having all sorts of issues. Can't imagine why. So that is what I have to say.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. Like, Landy is the ultimate wolf. What a crazy piece of shit. Yeah, lamb. I mean, I agree with both of you also. Like, Brian is a lamb. I think he's a sweet, sweet lamb. Melinda, almost, I mean, I almost feel like she does get my vote over Brian, but that's a really tough one. And then ultimate survivor, I don't, in my mind, maybe it's Pet Sounds. I really liked your answer, Dave. I can't pretend like I would come up with a good answer like that. So, but I like yours and I'd love to steal it. But my lesser one was Pet Sounds, just because it seems like any music lover that I talk to, if Beach Boys comes up, those are the next two words out of their mouth.
I was going to say, the reason why I was going to say Smile, because that was his masterpiece that caused his breakdown, because he never completed it until decades later. That survived because when he finally got himself mentally cleared or whatever, he was able to finally finish it and be like, I am so happy with the way we just presented that. Like, it's done. Yeah. It's no longer a struggle for me. I'm not worrying about my unfinished piece. I finally did it. But that was my amendment to my initial one, which was the production stuff. So there you go.
Both
Absolutely.
Excellent answers.
Impressions didn't really change. I mean, I knew the basic story. I wanted certain details that weren't forthcoming, but I got a lot of details that I wasn't expecting that I did like. So my impression is virtually the same, I would say.
Same.
Mine changed a little bit in terms of just a greater appreciation and understanding of why he was such a musical genius, and also just I would say a greater amount of understanding and empathy for the things that he went through.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jen, yours are unchanged. Still love
They're
them.
unchanged. I know everything and I love him.
We're going to be reading Mud Ride, the messy trip through the grunge explosion by Steve Turner of the band Mudhoney. This book details not just the band, but the whole origin of the Seattle scene in the 80s into the early 90s. Steve Turner, of course, this is what it looks like there, but it's called Mud Ride. It's actually pretty short, too. It's only about 7 hours, so it's not super long, but we are going to be really doing a deep dive into the early days of the Seattle scene.
Okay. I'm so excited. I love Mudhoney and grunge. Oh, it'll be good. Great pick. Yes. All right. Well, I just want to thank everybody for joining us again for this episode on Brian Wilson. Join us again next time so we can talk about grunge and Mudhoney. And
like and subscribe the channel.
Yes, obviously.
Find us on Facebook,
follow,
Instagram.
like.
Yeah, all that shit.
Yeah. What are we going to do to the bell this time? I think people should gently tap it and respect the seriousness of the bell, because it does good things for you, which is give you notifications for when our episodes come out.
Right, because subscribing is not enough. You don't get told that something is out if you're just a subscriber. Yes. It's in your feed, but you don't get any notification. So this is the only way that you can be told a new episode is there.
Yep. Yes. Exactly.
So just
exactly
give it a little touch. All right. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you next time.
Bye.